I'm Holly, and today I'm going to show you how to make a windsock. You could tie it to the top of your tent, you could take it to a festival, you could hang it in the garden or take it to the beach. The windsock is made from a material called Ripstop, which is the same stuff used to make kites, so it's light, durable and waterproof, and it comes in lots of different lovely colours. It's easy to get hold of, eBay sells it. And then everything else today that I'm going to use should be things that you have at home, or if not, you can get in the supermarket very easily. As a printmaker, I'm constantly trying to find new and simple ways to make it easier for people to print at home. Block printing is a really good method. It's easy and simple, or as complicated as you like. So you can buy a piece of lino in any art shop. Sometimes they're already mounted on a piece of block, which makes it even easier. Draw on your design and then cut it out. And then you put the ink on and make a pattern. So that's one answer. You could use a potato, which is a really great simple way of creating a repeat pattern. Or you could use paper stencils, which is used in screen printing. And today I'm going to show you a simplified version of screen printing. First of all, you need to have a sewing machine. You need to have the Ripstop fabric, you need some sponge dabbers or a big sponge cut up into lots of bits. You need some inks. These are screen printing inks, but acrylic paint works just as well. I've tested it out and it's waterproof. Some PVA tape or something like that, thick masking tape will work. Some garden wire, some dowling and scrap paper for your paper stencils. Our theme today is time passing and the change of seasons. So I've decided to have a look at the bird migration seen around Suffolk in the autumn. The birds make incredible patterns in the sky. One of the things to consider when you're making the windsock or a kite is that the design needs to be strong and bold, so to be seen up high. Okay, so now it's time to start making. First of all, I'm going to clear the decks so that I've got a nice space to work with. The first thing to do is to cut out two of your windsock patterns. Here's the pattern. Now the measurements are 100 centimetres, a metre long, and a metre long up there. This is a right angle, and this measures 38 centimetres, and then at this end it measures 24 centimetres. You need to cut out two of these, and it doesn't matter if it's not completely accurate. So using my template, I've cut out two pieces that I'm going to stitch together to make my sock. Before you start sewing the actual windsock, I think it's a really good idea to get a piece of scrap and test out some stitches. The stitch I'm suggesting is a zigzag stitch in about medium width. And children, if you're doing this, please make sure you've got an adult to help you with it, because the sewing machine can be dangerous. So now I've done my practice on the sewing machine, it's time to sew these two pieces together. So we're just going to sew straight down one edge to the bottom. I'm going to pin them first of all, just to keep it in place when you're sewing so it doesn't slip. Mention that there is no right or wrong side on Ripstop, so it doesn't matter which side you sew together. So I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to sew zigzag stitch all the way down to the bottom. Try to sew straight and as close to the edge as you possibly can, but once you've finished it, you can trim off any edges. So once I've finished sewing all the way down one edge, I'm going to take out the pins and then open up the sock, and then we can get ready to print it. Now that we're ready to print, I'm going to get the windsock pattern that I've cut out and sewn up, and I'm going to tape it down onto the table so it's nice and secure for printing with our paper stencils. I've also taped the bin liner pattern down as well, so that we can print at the same time. Before we start printing and cutting out the stencils, just to show you, this is using paper cutout stencils, really simple method, on top of the Kite fabric, and using, actually this is screen printing ink, but it also, the metallic is an acrylic paint, so it's a mix and match, and it all works very well. Then I've tried it on the bin liner, so you can print onto a bin liner very easily with acrylic paint, and it stays on and it's waterproof. That's using a paper stencil cutout. And then just to show you, this is a piece of linen with a stencil cut out on top of it, so you can get, you know, precise shapes and lines, and or it can be as simple or as detailed as you want. Right, so now you need to cut out your stencils. Get some newspaper and a pen, and then depending on how you like to work, you can either draw out your design or just get cutting. Now, because mine's going to be quite abstract, I'm not going to draw my pattern out. I'm going to start with cutting out sort of like you would do a snowflake, so folding it and cutting it and folding it. But equally, you could do one design, one print. Okay, so I've cut this stencil out. This is the first one I'm going to print. I'm going to stick it down with some tape or masking tape, so it doesn't wobble when you're printing. Now I'm going to use these dabbers, sponge dabbers, which are really, really useful, and you know, they're washable, so you can just reuse them over and over, or equally just a sponge that you could chop up into small bits. So here are some inks, just a small selection of colours. These are screen printing inks, which I'm going to use on the Kite material. So to start with, I'm going to mix up a kind of greeny, bluey colour. And I'm going to start dabbing. So just dab through the paper, hold the paper stencil, and start painting. Ready to peel it off. Very carefully, because it is still wet. So you'll see you've got your first layer of colours. So now I'm going to move on to the bin liner and do exactly the same thing, but I'm going to use acrylic paint instead on the bin liner, which is waterproof and won't come off. Usually the paper stencils, if it's a newspaper one, it usually lasts only one or two goes, but if it's made with a stronger card or paper, thicker paper, then it will last a few times. So really now it's up to you as to how you want it to look. So you have to make those decisions as you're going along. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to put on another layer of stencils, which will be slightly bigger imagery and maybe a little bit darker. So I'm going to cut out some more stencils, a bit like these. Now this should be nearly dry because it dries so quickly, the acrylic paint. So do exactly the same thing. Put down your stencil, tape it down and start printing again. So if you feel like you haven't filled up all the spaces you want to with the large newsprint, it's a good idea to cut out some small stencils on some thicker card, and then you can go around filling in any gaps that you can find on your pattern. The next thing I want to add to this pattern is some more little specks of black that are meant to represent lots of insects flying around. So I'm going to use a larger paper stencil, start at the top, stick it down as before, and then start printing. I'm going to put on some birds which are flying in the distance. So they're very simple shapes. I'm just going to test out on here just to get the colour and the sort of shape right. This is a card stencil, just to make sure it's how I want it to look. And they're going to get smaller towards the top to give it a sense of perspective. So that's the simple shape. Now it's time to sew them up and turn them into windsocks. Make sure that the ink is really dry before you start sewing up. So I'm going to leave these here for half an hour until they're completely dry. The things you'll need to sew up your windsock are obviously sewing machine. We need some pliers and wire cutters, some scissors, some Selotape, some plasticky PVA tape, string, a piece of dowling, one for each, some double-sided tape and some gardening wire. First thing you need to do is to cut the length of wire that you're going to need. So cut a piece of wire just slightly longer than the bottom edge, and a piece for the top. Cut that piece. It's an approximate because you can bend it over once it's in place. And then we're going to sew a hem edge onto the bottom of your pattern and onto the top. So you need to fold it over once, like that, and to make it slightly easier I should pin that. Pin along. You can do this by hand, of course, if you haven't got a sewing machine, but much quicker if you have. So pin long all the way to the edge. And then do that on the top as well. Get your sewing machine, thread it up, and put it back onto a zigzag stitch. One edge. And I'm going to sew the top edge and do the same again. So once you've finished sewing up your hem and your top edge, now we can attach some tabs, which you're going to then attach the string to the dowling so that it can fly. So you need 4 spaced equally along the top. So cut out 4 little pieces of fabric and sew them on. So you have one at the end here. But make sure that you don't sew it too high, because otherwise you won't be able to feed the wire through. Okay, so then they're ready to sew on. It's a good idea to sew up and down a few times on the tab to make sure it's really strong. And now the next one. The last bit to sew up is the long seam, which will then make it into a tube. So start at the top, but make sure you don't cover up where the wire is going to be fed through. So now it's all sewn up, you've got to turn it inside out to finally reveal the pattern. Feed the wire all the way through the hem that you've sewn at the top of the windsock. At the end of each piece of wire, bend it over with some pliers on both sides so that you can hook it together and it will keep it in place. Now to attach the windsock to the dowling, I'm going to tie bits of string or thread or fishing line to these 4 tabs and then link them to the top of the dowling. So cut a length of thread just under 1 metre. Fold it in half. And thread it through the tab. Do the same for the other 3 tabs. So once you've done all 4, tie a knot to secure them all together. And then we're going to stick that to the dowling. Using some really strong gaffa tape, attach the threads to the dowling. make sure it's really securely fixed so that it doesn't come off in the wind. Now I'm going to do exactly the same with the bin liner. I'm going to thread through some wire for the top circumference. I've threaded through a piece of wire all the way through within the drawstring of the bin liner, like this, so it comes out the other end. And I shall join those together in the same way we did with the other one. So in the same way that with the kite fabric we made a hem at the bottom, I'm going to fold over the plastic bin liner and stick it down with sellotape so that we make a hem around the wire. Turn it over, and now I'm going to join the two seams. So I'm going to seal this seam up using tape, and you want to make sure it is sealed because that's the way where the wind goes through, it will keep its shape, so it's quite important. So attach 4 pieces of thread or fishing line around the circumference at the top and then attach it to the dowling. So using super strong gaffa tape, I'm going to stick the cotton onto the inside of the bin liner. And I'm going to do the same for the other 3. Tie a knot with all 4 pieces of cotton and fix it to the dowling with a piece of gaffa tape. So that's the Windsock Finish. You can also add tassels to the bottom or anything you like to make it blow in the wind.